If you've ever thought about getting polyurethane suspension bushings for your vehicle, then this video is for you. I've had these for over 15 years, so I know everything about the good, the bad, and the ugly, and what they're like to live with year after year. We're going to talk about that and a whole lot more next.
Toys for life.
Alright guys, on the left you have a polyurethane bushing, and on the right you've got a factory rubber bushing. To catch those of you up that might be new to this, the first question really is why? Why would you want to go with a different bushing material other than the stock rubber? And the reason is, for high performance use, track use, those sorts of things, polyurethane is much more rigid and resistant to forces that are being applied to it, so that it keeps the suspension geometry as it was intended. Under hard cornering or acceleration and those sorts of things, the rubber has a tendency to deflect under those heavy loads, and that changes the geometry or the alignment, if you will, and it alters the handling. For a little demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and lock each one of these in a vise, and then using, a medium size to a long screwdriver, I'm going to apply a little force to it, and you'll see exactly the deflection that I'm talking about. First up, I've got the rubber bushing locked down in the vise, and I'm just going to go ahead and apply a little bit of torque. And you can see how much that rubber is deflecting. I'm going to go ahead and switch out the rubber for the polyurethane, clamp it down, and you'll have to take my word for it, but I'm going to be using the same amount of force. And you can see there's a little bit of deflection, but I would say it's probably about a third, something like that. And that's what gives you the rigidity under heavy loads to give you a truer suspension alignment under acceleration, cornering, braking, those sorts of things. So that's why you might want to change out the rubber mount for the polyurethane mount. But hold up, don't write that check out quite yet for your new polyurethane bushings. Like most things in life, there's no such thing as a free lunch, and unfortunately that holds true with these bushings as well. In exchange for a little bit of that peace and quiet that you have with the rubber bushings, when you upgrade to poly, you're going to gain a little bit of noise, harshness, and vibration. In my experience, it's not too bad when you're just changing out the bushings in your A-arms. But there's one other downside that we need to talk about. So this brings us to the downside of the polyurethane suspension bushings. Unlike the factory rubber bushings, these actually need to be maintained. There are moving parts. The inner sleeve spins independently of the urethane bushing. So there's a tendency for them to dry out. If you're in moisture a lot, there will be corrosion in there. And it's not uncommon for them to squeak after even just a year or two. Which is exactly what this is doing, because it's been 2.5 years since I've had this apart. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the A-arms so that I can disassemble each bushing, clean, inspect, and replace if necessary. Okay, so we've got the A-arm off, and this thing is grungy and dirty from a couple years of summertime use. So let me go ahead and clean all this up quick. All right, much better, much cleaner. Let's go ahead and press out these inner sleeves. And what I'm going to do is use a socket on one side and a larger socket on the other. And using the bench vise, I'm just going to press the inner sleeve out through the bushing and into the bigger socket. Inside the polyurethane bushing, you can see these little grooves. And over a year or two, the lubricant that you use on these, which is it's not a grease, it's like a sticky, gooey stuff. It tends to kind of dry out and harden, and it fills up these little grooves. So I'm going to go ahead and, using this pick, clean them all out so that the new lubricant has grooves to kind of settle into. Put one of these things in my hand and I feel like a dental hygienist. Okay, using a little bit of solvent, I've already done this, but I've cleaned the inside of these bushings as best I can and let them dry so there's no longer any solvent left in here. I've also taken the inner sleeves and cleaned them up with 500 grit sandpaper, solvent first to get any gunk off. Now I'm going to take the specific grease for this, and it's just this really clear, sticky, gooey crap. And it's just a mess, so I'm going to use my little finger here and do my best to work it in to each one of these bushings. Then also onto each one of these pins. Then go ahead and press the pin back in. A-arm reinstalled with the cleaned and lubed bushings. Nice and quiet, just like it should be. Good for another year or two. So at the end of the day, should you consider upgrading your bushings to polyurethane? I would say it depends on a couple things. Number one, if you just primarily drive on the street, you don't do a lot of high performance driving, they're probably more hassle than they're worth. If you do a fair amount of performance driving, consider what you're doing. Road courses and things like that, you might want to go with poly on all of your suspension bushings. If it's just drag racing, clearly the rear A-arms take the most abuse from acceleration and the deflection forward on the A-arms as the car tries to accelerate. But just know this, there's quite a bit of maintenance, as you saw, and I have to do that about every 1.5 to 2 years, depending on how much you can tolerate the squeak. So guys, if you like this video, please hit that share, like, and subscribe below. And as always, thanks for watching.